morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this important conversation. I'm Jason Marzek, and I direct the Adrian Arsht Latin America Center at the Atlantic Council. First off, I hope everyone had a restful and healthy holidays and a great start to 2022. Feliz Año Nuevo a todos. I believe it's particularly important that today we are hosting the first public event of the year for the Adrian Arsht Latin America Center, and actually for the Atlantic Council overall, and that we are doing so to convene to draw attention to the importance of raising awareness on the future of democratic opposition and the future of the interim government in the months ahead in Venezuela. With so much going on in the world, January 5th today is such an important moment to continue to draw our attention to how we can help to restore democratic institutions in Venezuela. And I want to thank our speakers who joined us today to help us to do so. U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere Affairs, Kevin O'Reilly, Roberto Patino, Evelyn Pinto, and Fabiana Santamaria. I'll introduce the last three in a moment. A reminder, first off, that today's conversation will be in both Spanish and in English. And for those joining via Zoom, please click on the interpretation button on the bottom menu bar to select your preferred language. We also invite you to use Twitter to follow the conversation or tweet about the conversation with the hashtag #ACVenezuela. Now, as our viewers know, that today, January 5th, is the day that the constitutional mandate of the 2015 National Assembly and the interim government was set to expire, per the statute adopted by the opposition-controlled legislature in 2019. However, just last week, the National Assembly approved a reform to that statute that extended its mandate and that of Juan Guaido's interim presidency. While many countries have yet to recognize the continuity of the interim government, the U.S. renewed its recognition in a public statement last week. Continued support for the interim government is incredibly important for a number of reasons, especially, among others, for the protection of the country's financial assets outside of its jurisdiction, which will be necessary for Venezuela's eventual reconstruction. This is also a moment for a reassessment of the status quo. With inter-party fractures, fallout from the November 21st regional elections, and also the stalled negotiations in Mexico, 2022 can be a year for new thinking, and that could include incorporating new diverse voices into Venezuela's pro-democracy forces and exploring different paths to put Venezuela on the road toward institution rebuilding and democratic restoration. To chart a sustainable path toward democracy, opposition forces have an opportunity to overcome internal fissures, an opportunity to reconnect with the needs of constituents, an opportunity to also open additional channels for younger leaders to place their ideas and visions in decision-making processes. There's also an opportunity to rethink engagement with the international community and also the best path forward for a return to the Mexico City negotiations and beyond. Our speakers will address these questions in our upcoming conversation. I also do want to note that today's event is part of our broader Venezuela programming of the Adrian Arsht Latin America Center that focuses on promoting the restoration of democratic institutions in Venezuela through a sustained consensus-building international campaign that advances an inclusive Venezuelan-led democratic resolution to the political crisis. Our broader Venezuela work also includes our recently launched Transatlantic Fellowship to promote U.S.-European Union engagement and expertise on Venezuelan affairs, our Red de Apoyo Women's Network in partnership with Global Affairs Canada, and our Venezuela Working Group that convenes high-level policymakers and experts to propose actionable recommendations for Venezuela's most pressing issues. So stay tuned for virtual and hybrid activities from these initiatives throughout the coming year. Now, with that, it's my pleasure to officially welcome and wish a happy new year to Deputy Assistant Secretary of State Kevin O'Reilly, who will speak with Adrian Arsht Latin America Center Deputy Director Diego Area in a keynote conversation. We'll then hear from three emerging Venezuelan leaders on how they view opportunities for renewal within the opposition and their role in Venezuela's future efforts to restore democracy. Those leaders include Roberto Patino, who is the co-founder of Caracas Mi Convive. He's also a fellow of the Atlantic Council's Millennium Leadership Program. Evelyn Pinto, who is the director of National Youth for the Acción Democrática political party, and Fabiana Santamaria, who is a member of the Legislative Council of Mérida State, who was elected this past November. With that, it's my pleasure to turn the table over to Diego. Diego?
Gracias, Jason, and welcome everyone to yet another Atlantic Council event focused on Venezuela. We'll continue doing that in the 2022. Deputy Assistant Secretary O'Reilly, always a pleasure to have you join us. Thank you for taking the time from your holidays with the family to participate in this very timely conversation. Today, January 5, was a heavily anticipated date given the uncertainty around the continuity of the interim government. While that uncertainty has been mostly dissipated with the approval of the transition statute, many questions still remain around how the opposition can improve its credibility among the Venezuelan people and find common ground behind a new way forward for achieving democratic restoration through a negotiated resolution to the political crisis. The renewal of US recognition of the interim government is an important signal of support, and broader and coordinated international support is needed to ensure that efforts to restore democracy in Venezuela can be sustained. In tandem, this unique moment in Venezuela is an opportunity for emerging leaders, as Jensen mentioned, in Venezuela to show how a new generation of community organizing, social activists, and student leaders can provide fresh ideas and new oxygen to the main opposition parties. That is why we're joined here today by three emerging leaders to share their vision on how to rebuild Venezuela's democracy. With that, I want to kick off this first keynote conversation of the year with the following question. Deputy O'Reilly, following 2 rounds of discussions in the National Assembly, the Venezuela opposition approved the reform that extends the constitutional continuity of the interim presidency at the Delegate Commission passed today, January 5, when the mandate of the interim government was originally set to expire. How will the US government seek to engage with the interim government and broader opposition forces in 2022 to strengthen and accelerate the path towards democratic restoration? Will there be a renewed US approach to support a return to the Mexico negotiations? You're muted, Deputy. All right.
Now, we'll try that again.
Yes.
Good morning, everybody. First, just so that, frankly, people hear a representative of the US government say it, let me start off with the basics. The government of the United States of America recognizes Juan Guaido Marquez as the interim president of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and recognizes the legitimacy of the mandate held by the National Assembly freely elected on December 6th, 2015 by Venezuelan voters and sworn into office on January 5th, 2016. So we welcome the January 3rd statute passed by the National Assembly that extends that legitimate National Assembly's mandate and the authority of interim President Guaido. And along with other friends of Venezuela from across this hemisphere, from around the world, we continue to support the negotiations that began last year in Mexico City. We want a peaceful settlement negotiated among Venezuelans, leading to free and fair presidential and legislative elections. Mr. Maduro needs to come back to the table and do so in good faith for the benefit of the Venezuelan people. And we are going to continue to use the diplomatic and economic tools available to us, and we will continue to work with other members of the international community and with Venezuelans of good faith inside Venezuela and abroad to press for change, to press for the release of all those unjustly detained for political reasons, for freedom of the press, for the independence of political parties, for respect for universal human rights, and for an end to human rights abuses. And so that is why we continue to support the efforts of interim President Guaido and Venezuela's broad array of democratic actors, including the unitary platform, as they work to sustain and broaden a coalition that represents all segments of Venezuelan life and society, and as they continue to look for solutions to Venezuela's many challenges. Have I overlooked any aspect of your question, my friend?
No, that was great. Thank you for your answer. Let's move to talk about a little bit about our European partners. Well, the US will continue to recognize, as you just said, the Venezuelan interim government. The European Union no longer recognizes Juan Guaidó as interim president, but rather as a privileged interlocutor. Others may follow. And recent elections in Bolivia, Peru, and Chile, and upcoming presidential votes in 2022 in Colombia and Brazil could also alter regional support for the interim government. Accelerating democratic restoration in Venezuela, as you know, will require coordinated international support for the efforts of opposition forces overall on the ground. So how will the US continue to collaborate with the EU and its international allies on a unified policy towards Venezuela, especially in support of a negotiated democratic transition and protection of Venezuelan assets?
I've just stated how the United States government approaches the Venezuelan situation and how we look to grapple with and help Venezuelans grapple with the conditions, the situation they face. Not every government comes to the same framework, works within the same legal framework, the same constitutional framework. Some governments have come to a very similar situation as our set of decisions as our own. Others have approached the problem differently. We're not focused, we're not worried. We have not been troubled by friends of Venezuela, friends of Venezuelan democracy, approaching the problem from their own social, political, constitutional frameworks. What we have found in many quarters of Latin America, in many quarters in Europe and in the European Union, is a community of like-minded governments on this issue, whether they are from the political center, left or right, who place their focus on helping Venezuelans recover and restore democratic governance in their country. So we support those Venezuelans who support democracy, and we find many, many others. And you referred in particular to the European Union. We find many, many others within the European Union who do exactly the same, starting from a different, sometimes a different legal, sometimes a different constitutional set of circumstances. We are looking to work together with them in support of Venezuelans to achieve the outcome that Venezuelans have pursued in good faith for years and will continue to pursue, which is free and fair democratic elections, legislative and presidential, in terms that allow the voice of Venezuelan citizens to help set the course for their nation. And that's, and frankly, we have not found it terribly difficult to work with many friends of the Venezuelan people within that framework, regardless of whatever diplomatic posture that they've pursued. You know, these are, this isn't rocket science. You know, here in our hemisphere, the Inter-American Democratic Charter just celebrated its 20th anniversary. Its first article says that the peoples of the Americas have a right to democracy and their governments have an obligation to promote and defend it. Article 3 calls for respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms and periodic free and fair elections. Those are, and this hemisphere reached a consensus that these are essential elements of representative democracy here. So the task is fairly straightforward. Help Venezuelans empower themselves to once again freely and fairly choose who will represent them in government, and a government that respects their liberties.
Thank you very much. I think we agree that the Venezuela issue is beyond ideologies. It's about democracy, about the human rights, and that unifies the international community for sure. So thank you for your answer. Now I would like to move the conversation to the Barinas state election rerun next Sunday, an important moment for Venezuela. After Fray Superlano won the state in November elections, he was disqualified by Maduro forces. Now 5 candidates, including Maduro's former foreign minister Jorge Arreaza, will face off in the upcoming vote. Why is the Barinas rerun election important, and what does it say about the prospects of rebuilding democratic institutions of Venezuela? What do you think about it?
Well, since at least the time of those 2015 elections I referred to earlier, until today, Nicolás Maduro and his supporters have shown really contempt for the democratically expressed will of the Venezuelan people. They invested a great deal of effort early in the mandate of the National Assembly elected in 2015 to undermine the authority of that assembly. And in 2018, Maduro presided over a pantomime of a presidential election, and he and his supporters declared him reelected. And so we start from that foundation, and it creates a through line right up until what occurred in Barinas late last year and what's about to occur on Sunday. We did not then, and we do not now, consider the 2018 contest free, fair, legitimate. When Mr. Maduro's 2013 mandate expired, so did any claim to legitimate executive authority, and hence the presidency, the interim presidency of Juan Guaido. Mr. Maduro continued these efforts to retain power by any means in 2020, conducting sham elections that, just as we saw 2 years earlier, deprived Venezuelans of their most basic democratic rights and drove Venezuela deeper into political crisis. In 2021, the National Assembly that he created, which we in no way consider legitimate, again manipulated the rules for the electoral game and focused on the local and regional elections. And they assumed the burden of showing that they could allow and administer free and fair elections. And they failed to meet that burden, clear across Venezuela. And despite everything and all the manipulations of the process, they lost Barinas. And then the gloves came off. Results canceled, a new election called, candidates barred from office, independent voices silenced. And next Sunday, Venezuelans in the world will see another manipulated electoral process in Barinas. So it really comes down to a question of faith on all parts, but most fundamentally on Maduro's lack of faith in his ability to present a legitimate platform on free and fair rules to the Venezuelan people. And so yet another pantomime election.
Thank you.
That said, if I might, it also demonstrates the commitment of Venezuelan citizens, of civil society, of political actors, of democratic political actors, to pursue what is really pursue change, and to do so peacefully, and to do so by mobilizing the citizenry. That's not some moment. This is, and day by day by day, Venezuelans demonstrated this is a movement.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for the clarification of the need of the people for change, for some kind of change. And thinking about change and thinking about a solid alternative to Maduro, I want to move to talk a little bit about the internal fissures within the opposition. The resignation of Julio Borges from the interim government was the latest and most clear example of long-running fissures within Venezuela's opposition. In this moment of internal crisis, we also see an opportunity for the opposition to renew its leadership, reconnect with its needs of its constituents, and open pathways for emerging leaders to bring new visions for change for Venezuela. What role can the US and its partners have in supporting new opposition leaders from diverse gender, age, geographic, and socioeconomic backgrounds in the democratic dialogue and reconstruction in Venezuela?
Well, first, if I can talk a little bit about what and I'm an outsider, but what I've observed in recent weeks about the debate. And look, the Legitimate National Assembly, it remains Venezuela's last democratically elected institution. And it's met this crisis by holding firm to the principles and to the letter of Venezuela's 1999 constitution. That's how they came to confirm, or through the processes of that constitution, they came to reconfirm Juan Guaidó as interim president and to extend their own mandate to meet this emergency. And this is an important point. The National Assembly acted as all responsible, democratic, deliberative bodies accountable to the citizenry must act, with free and open debate, sometimes loud, boisterous, and even rancorous, with disagreements, negotiations, and finally with compromises. And that's what we saw over the course of recent weeks. And that's how the National Assembly came to reconfirm its commitment to defend democracy and continue its pursuit of free and fair elections as the best way to pull Venezuela out of this tailspin. And that's what it means to blaze a path back to democracy. Over the course of the last year, we've clearly seen that Venezuelans, that political actors in Venezuela, despite different views on tactics, despite their different conditions they find themselves facing in different parts of the country, despite the pressures that Mr. Maduro and his supporters place upon them, have made commitments to expand the coalition in opposition to Mr. Maduro, and to call in new voices from what had perhaps been political peripheries. And that is admirable. That is really the foundation of the unitary platform. That is why we've seen a mix of experienced hands and of new voices coming into politics and to across the country and into civic activism. Mr. Maduro and those who support him inside Venezuela and beyond have done what they can to extinguish Venezuelan democracy, but they're not going to succeed, because Venezuelans know what they've lost. and we've seen their determination to recover it. You know, the American poet Walt Whitman once wrote that when liberty goes out of a place, it's not the first to go, nor the second or third to go. It waits until all of the rest, it waits for all of the rest to go. It's the last. Venezuelans understand that. I've, even in the course of my career, because I'm not an emerging leader like some of the other folks you'll be speaking to in a moment. I've seen it. They know what they've lost, and I've seen them renew themselves year after year in pursuit of recovering it. And so we stand with them, and we stand with liberty.
Thank you. On the same note, as you know, we're joined here today by 3 Venezuelan emerging leaders from across different opposition parties who represent grassroots efforts to empower everyday citizens and revitalize democratic change in Venezuela. So last question for you, Deputy O'Reilly. What would you like to share with them about the U.S. commitment to supporting and elevating their voices in the path towards rebuilding Venezuela's democracy?
First, we look at this we approach this challenge with determination and with a certain humility. We stand with them and their efforts. We understand, as we've always understood, that Venezuela and its challenges are ultimately for Venezuelans to meet, that we will stand, we will defend our interests. One of the mechanisms, for example, or one of the elements of our sanctions regime against Mr. Maduro and his supporters is to motivate changes in their policies. Another is to defend our interests, defend our financial system, for example, from being abused by their activities. But at the same token, we are supporters of those who ascribe to those principles I referred to in the Inter-American Democratic Charter, who want to restore proper constitutional governance in Venezuela, Venezuelan citizens resolving Venezuelan problems. And we will remain supportive of those efforts over the long haul, because we aim to support the democratic aspirations of citizens of this hemisphere across this hemisphere. Governments constituted by those citizens get to choose their own paths. We're not telling Venezuela, and we won't tell Venezuela how to govern itself. That's a sovereign decision of the Venezuelan people. But on a foundation, as we've agreed to across this hemisphere, of effective democratic governance, because it's the best way to make sure that people can live in liberty and eventually recover their prosperity and their stability. And so we'll be with them.
Deputy O'Reilly, we really appreciate your valuable time and perspective today. So thank you again for joining us today. I will now give the floor to my colleague, Domingo Sadurní, who will moderate the next panel with our 3 Venezuelan speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Diego. Y un saludo y feliz años a todos los que se conectan hoy. And
my greetings and Happy New Year to all of you joining us today. I will switch to Spanish. Fabiano, Roberto, Evelyn, welcome. I'm very pleased to have you here for this next discussion. As noted in the previous conversation, today marks a key day for the continuity of the interim government and the struggle for democracy in Venezuela. However, it also seems like it might be a good time to re-legitimize leadership, reconnect with new communities, and create spaces for new faces that can refresh and strengthen the struggle with new ideas, proposals, and confidence. That is why we are going to be talking to these three young Venezuelan leaders from different parties. They have different profiles. They represent different regions. We want to hear their perspectives and visions and the future of the opposition and the role the international community can play in supporting democratic forces within Venezuela. I will be speaking to the following individuals. Fabiana, who's a member of the Voluntad Popular Party, elected as a legislator for the state of Mérida in the November 21 election. She's joining us from Mérida. Roberto, who is a member of Primero Justicia, founder of the social program Caracas Mi Convive and Alimenta la Solidaridad in the November elections. He was candidate for Democratic Unity for mayor of the municipality of Libertador. He's joining us from Margarita. Evelyn is a national youth leader for Acción Democrática. She's a key ally for the work we do on the council to empower Venezuelan women. Evelyn is connecting from Caracas. Fabiana, I will begin with you. In the previous conversation with Deputy O'Reilly, they discussed how important it is for the future of the opposition to reconnect with the political bases and reconnect with the people to re-legitimize the leadership. As a legislator for the state of Mérida, you have a unique opportunity to do this, to address the basic needs of your constituents, provide new opportunities, and build trust in the democratic alternative as a path forward in the reconstruction of the country's institutions. As a legislator, despite the challenges you face in terms of how to chart this path at the local level in Mérida. Good morning, everyone. First, I wanted to extend my greetings and thank you for this opportunity to speak with you. We've seen political leadership and the relationship with the citizens break down because most decisions, political decisions, are made in Caracas. And the situation in Caracas is very different from that in the rest of the country. A city like Mérida, where I live, we may go 12 hours without electricity, or we may have intermittent water service. And sometimes you have to line up for days to buy different products. And this is not as common in Caracas. The regime is trying to protect Caracas within a bubble, and the same is not true in the rest of the country. So since these realities are very different in Mérida, we have to look at how we can connect with people, because the strategies that we adopt in Mérida are going to be very different from those in Maracaibo or Caracas. There are two very important allies that we have in Mérida. It's the church and universities. In previous occasions, when there was a reform to the constitution of the state of Mérida and they undermined in these sectors, I think that we as legislators had to be a bridge between the political world and all sectors of society. We have to create partnerships with the university and the church. That is key. We have to bring them back within the Constitution and create true partnerships where we can all sit down together to address proposals. The church has been a key ally in the fight for democracy in the country. The university has brilliant minds with brilliant ideas. Those are being lost. So we have to focus on universities, not just because of the pandemic, but even before the pandemic, we've seen some technical issues that need to be addressed in Venezuela. And this is one of my priorities as a legislator, that is to rebuild trust between society and the politicians. Thank you very much, Fabiana. I wanted to turn to you, Roberto, on this very same topic of the disconnect that we've seen happening over time between national political leadership and people more at the regional level. So, Roberto, my question is, in recent months, particularly, this idea of the renewal of the party leadership and politics to create ideas or give an opportunity for ideas and proposals from a new generation of Venezuelan leaders, especially in terms of the internal elections and the opposition parties. Should this be a priority for the opposition in 2022? And how can the party leadership be renewed to strengthen the opposition in the struggle for democracy in Venezuela? Thank you, Domingo. I wanted to thank you all for this opportunity. I am in Libertador, but I did do some pre-campaigning here. Today, I wanted to express some optimism in terms of Venezuela's future. This optimism is rooted in what I have observed in the communities represented by people like Fabiana and Evelyn. There are hundreds, thousands of young leaders, young men and women who are fighting for democracy, this moral reserve, as I would call it. This social fabric is going to be key for us to be able to leave behind the dictatorship we've been under in this country. Domingo, I do believe that political parties play a very important role. I think that it's positive that following the November 21st elections, we heard important voices in the different opposition parties calling for renewal. How this renewal will play out in terms of inside the parties and some of the agreements reached to renewed leadership will be specific to each party.
Está presente. Déjase lo que en la oposición venezolana hay un
In the
problema.
Venezuela opposition, there's a serious issue of governance and how to define the leadership of the opposition. To be able to leave behind the situation, we need leadership that comes from the bottom up. The political parties have to overhaul themselves and also to promote an overhaul and strengthening of Venezuelan society writ large. In 2022, we all have to fight so that we can see different union leadership, trade union leadership with Pablo and Mother Semberno. And in the healthcare sector, we've seen them at the forefront in the fight against COVID-19. Just very briefly, I met with them in Caracas. I was really struck by them. These are individuals who are basically paying to work. They have to pay for their transportation to get to their workplaces, and they're paying what they would earn in a month. This is what gives their lives meaning. It's this vocation for service. This is something that's going to be key for us to climb out of this terrible situation our country is in. But I do think it's very important to also support youth leadership, student leaders, community leaders. Fabiana was saying this, the grassroots leaders, the ones who do social work, the ones doing humanitarian work. They are benchmarks in each of their communities. They enjoy credibility. We have to raise their profile. We have to strengthen them. We have to give them the tools they need so that they can be transformative in Venezuela. I also think it's going to be very important to provide tools and backing to all those, for example, my co-panelists, those who were elected on November 21st, they need to have the opportunity to demonstrate in their work that this change is not just a change of, okay, get out of here, you, so that I can take your place. No, this is about real change in Venezuelans' lives. I'm very encouraged by Rafael Ramirez in Maracaibo, his first few days in office, where he's out on the street, he's trying to deal with the trash issue. But in that very same state, he's partnered with Manuel Rosales from another political party. They share the vision of bringing democracy back to Venezuela. It's those types of examples. It's in our actions and what we do to rebuild this lost trust. Fabiana was saying the same thing. I will wrap up by saying there is a disconnect. We have to recognize this disconnect. We have to take it on. We have to understand it. And it's based on the facts on the ground. And Fabiana and Evelyn will understand it. We all are frustrated by the political situation. And we're frustrated because the political situation has not given us what we aspire to. We want democracy. We want freedom in our country. This is something we want every day. And given this reality, this specific situation, we are frustrated and we have to change things. We have to renew leadership. And what we have to do is work toward strengthening ourselves from the inside out. We've heard very important things today. We thank international countries for their solidarity. That's necessary. But I think that the path forward is one that will be built by us with our social fabric and with internal renewal so that we can move forward in the country. Thank you so much for those words. You mentioned some specific leaders who you've had contact with, who you know are doing the work on the ground. I wanted to turn to Evelyn on that very point. As you are the National Youth Director of Acción Democrática, you know firsthand the talent, ability, and desire of hundreds of young leaders nationwide. So I wanted to ask you, what opportunities are there to raise up the voices of these young people inside and outside the opposition parties? What specific actions exist to raise their voices?
Hi, everyone. Happy New Year. I'm so grateful for this invitation, and I'm so pleased to be with my co-panelists who do great work in Venezuela. I think that the mistrust that citizens feel toward political leaders is an opportunity for youth. Why? Because we're here to rebuild that trust. Citizens lack trust because they don't see consistency, they don't see agreements, they don't see compromise. One of the main things that we need to talk about is transparency. We need to speak clearly about what's happening in the country. The opposition has been involved in a number of scandals over the last year. And of course, we're under an authoritarian regime, which is always seeking to break unity and foment distrust of the opposition. So we have been called now to rebuild that trust. We're fresh faces with new ideas. We're not stained by corruption, which I think is really important because serious damage has been caused in this Venezuelan crisis by any taint of corruption. We need more visibility as leaders. It's not just the opportunity to be a candidate, but the opportunity to truly compete, to reach everybody that we want to represent. Roberto was a pre-candidate for the mayoralty in his town. I ran as an assemblywoman, but because there wasn't agreement among the opposition, I couldn't have a true opportunity there. So if we're going to make change and build trust, we need an intergenerational pact to set clear rules for reaching agreements. So that can be agreements regarding an electoral process. What will be the method for choosing candidates for an upcoming election? And that needs to be determined far enough in advance so that everyone has the opportunity to campaign and convey their message. As part of this generational pact, we need to really train people in being active citizens. Venezuelans have been under an authoritarian regime for 20 years. They've lost trust in the democratic process at times. Now, we have had elections. We've asked for a referendum. We've protested on the streets. We've done everything we can with support of the international community, but I think that there's a lack of coherence in all these strategies. And that is needed for citizens to trust us again. But again, after 20 years of crisis, I feel like people have also lost hope a little bit. And that's something that we as young people can do something about by creating that connection, speak out so people can believe again that there's a chance for Venezuela to change, because not losing hope is the most important thing. And in this generational pact, we need to reach these long-term agreements, be more coherent, get greater visibility, connect with the people through greater transparency. Thanks to the Atlantic Council, I had the opportunity in August to participate in an event with the new US ambassador. And at that point, nobody was talking about participating in elections. I said we need to, but nobody was talking about it. And it was like the worst kept secret. Everybody knew we were going to participate, but it wasn't being announced officially. It wasn't being communicated. Why? Because there was no agreement as to how to do that. So that kind of thing makes people lose trust. If you're going to participate, why not just say so and announce it in time and to give people an opportunity? Just say, yes, we said we weren't going to participate, but given the circumstances, we've changed our minds for this reason, and this reason, and this reason. Just be clear, be open. As Fabiana said, decisions are made in Caracas, and it's a tiny little group making all the decisions. That has to change. Thank you, Evelyn. I want to turn to Fabiana again. Because you were talking about opportunities for young people. Fabiana now has an opportunity as she holds elected office in Mérida. And Fabiana, you were elected in a very complex, adversarial political context. As we know, the November elections didn't really have the guarantees they should have. And often the opposition are blocked from carrying out public policy. So how are you going to gain space as a minority in Mérida? As part of that minority, how will you be able to carry out your party's plans to serve their constituents. Well, clearly being part of the minority is going to limit us. We're not going to be able to do everything, but we do have the ability and the obligation to our constituents to carry out oversight of the majority party. We can ensure that the budget is executed as it should be, that there's no corruption, no abuses, no injustices. It's that oversight role. And the way that you really gain some ground is by speaking clearly and touching on topics that they won't touch. I think we need to talk about economic opportunities. Don't be talking about how we're victims. We want people to fall in love with the idea of being Venezuelan again. If you're hungry, you aren't going to protest. You don't have it in you to fight. That's how authoritarian regimes work. They get at people through their stomachs. So we need to make sure that we have a stable economy by promoting laws that protect the private sector so that people have the confidence to invest again. Merida has a lot of tourism potential, also in agricultural production. We have the resources to be a great city and make major contributions, but we need to ensure jobs and a stable economy because that will take away that argument that Maduro and his people have about how bad things are. Let's show people that you can live better, but to live better, you need economic freedoms and democracy. Thank you, Fabiana. I want to go back to Roberto today. As we know, January 5 is an important day. As it now marks the continuity of the interim government. There had been a great deal of uncertainty prior to this. So it's a good time for an honest reflection about the performance of the interim government after 3 years. So Roberto, what do you think the major missteps have been for the opposition and how can that be rectified to sustain the struggle for a return to democracy in Venezuela? How can you be constructive and not just have the opposition be the critic, but to actually bring forward proposals for the future?
Sí, de acuerdo, Domingo. Te agradezco la pregunta. Fíjate,
Thanks
mira,
for that question, Domingo. As to what you were saying about being constructive, I was going to say that we have to be tough on the problems, but we can't be so tough on the people. I think that's one of the challenges that those of us who want change have, because there ends up being so much focus on individual personal conflicts that you lose focus on the problems you're trying to fix. I want to focus on two mainly. First,
tener claridad y quizás en los últimos 3 años.
We need to have more clarity, and in the last 3 years, there have been some missteps in that sense. I think we need to be clear about a realistic theory of change. And I think we need to have a stronger Venezuela to be able to press for change. And we need to have a negotiated solution now. So in that sense, I think there's been an evolution. More and more political actors are committed to that route for returning to democracy in Venezuela. And then second, and I think this is fundamental as well,
que nos ha puesto quienes están en el poder desde hace más de 20
we've been
años.
set a trap by those who've been in power for the last 20 years. They've been fostering this polarization. And I like what Fabiana and Evelyn have said about coherence, about being in love with being Venezuelan, about focusing on the positive, because the rhetoric has all been about rejecting Chavism, and it's all been about not letting them rule instead of focusing on what we can bring to Venezuela, what we can do for Venezuela. And looking at a moment in history, Hugo Chavez started this movement 20 years ago, and he has since died 8 years ago, and we're still dealing with it. So I don't think it's enough to get rid of Maduro, to get rid of a person, because getting rid of a person didn't work before. So it was essential to have a focus on ideas about how to prosper in this century. And so I have 3 things to focus on. We have the issue of the petroleum sector. Agriculture was mentioned. We need to focus on these productive sectors for a better economy, and we need to get rid of cronyism in our organizations. One of the deepest wounds that all Venezuelans carry, as highlighted by the pandemic, is the separation of families. The Venezuela of solidarity, of coming together again. That's what is missing. Venezuelans want to be the best news of the century. We have all these problems, and despite this, we overcame it all. And despite everything, we're able to resolve and overcome major hurdles. That's what I want the news to be. Thank you, Roberto. Looking at the clock, I see we have only 3 more minutes. So I'd like to pose a question to Evelyn. I want to give you a hypothetical case. If you were now the national leader of your party, Democratic Action, what would you do differently? Roberto said that one major underlying issue in his view in Venezuela is machismo, and what would you do as a woman leader of your party? Thank you. Since there's so little time, I'll be very brief. If I were the national leader of my party, well, I would, without question, involve women and young people in the Mexico negotiations. If you don't have those voices represented, at least in an advisory capacity, it's going to be very difficult to reach agreements that truly address the challenges we face. I would set out clear rules for decision making. And in terms of gender, which is one of my passions, I'd say it's vital to create a protocol that addresses that. It's not just that it's hard to be a candidate. Last year, we see it in the I Believe You, Yo Te Creo movement. There are people who want to participate. They feel comfortable. But we need this anti-harassment protocol so that everyone can be more comfortable in that environment. And then we need financial support to actually be able to campaign. And going to the legal term, I would seek parity, gender parity. This is in the organic law for electoral processes. It needs to be a standard for any electoral process, something established in the law. And we need to raise the profile of women in other spaces, in media and the national realm. And this is where the international community can help us, where they can demand those kinds of rules for gender parity, because we have We have many capable women. It's a fallacy to say that that's not the case. In a study for 2015, it turned out that most of the elected deputies didn't have university studies, but women, they even had postgraduate studies completed. So women tend to be better prepared. They tend to be the community leaders. So we're ready. We just need the opportunities to raise our voice. We are 50% of the population, and we don't want to leave 50% of the population out. So I was as fast as possible.
Thank you very much. I think it was very important to bring those topics to bear in this important conversation. We've gone a bit over time, but Fabiana, I didn't want to let the opportunity pass because we have an international audience and you are joining us from Mérida. You've talked about the fact that your needs in Mérida are different from those in Caracas. So I was wondering what you think about how allied countries can support democratic legislators, people like you or others fighting for democracy in the country. I think there are two key ways they can provide support. Specifically, I was a participant in the IVLP program of the United States, and this completely changed my vision of how to engage in politics. It wasn't just to see how the US system works, but I shared this experience with 20 other young leaders from other countries in the region and saw how they could do this. So it's important for young people to get a different vision. Young people in Venezuela are not able to leave the country using their own means. We need to become familiar with countries where basic services are excellent, where things work. Those who were born in 2000 and have only experienced life under this type of regime don't have another vision. So these types of exchanges and programs are key. I also think that cooperation and support for programs is important. They're excellent initiatives. In my particular case, I work with an NGO that specializes in entrepreneurship, women's entrepreneurship, and this has helped my own political career. But international support could be great because most of the foreign aid and support goes to Caracas and organizations in Caracas. Even if they're virtual programs, it's difficult for us in many cases to connect because of lack of internet connectivity. We could perhaps seek out partnerships to create programs outside of Caracas in Venezuela for young people. We want them, this generation that's coming to power now, that is going to be the new leaders, needs support. Those of us who have been elected are the ones pushing these initiatives, and we need to do so hand in hand with the international community. This will help to build trust with those who voted for us. Thank you very, Fabiana. I'm really sorry we don't have more time to discuss these very important and interesting topics, but we have gone over time. So I wanted to bring this to a close by thanking each of you for taking time today to join in this important conversation. I invite everyone who's connected to continue to follow our programming on Venezuela in 2022, where we will be focused on providing analyses, seeking consensus, and bringing together different leaders from both inside and outside of Venezuela to support efforts to restore democracy in Venezuela. And with that, my thanks to you. Everyone have a wonderful rest of the day and start to the new year.